Welcome to this Fair Housing Orientation Program. After an introduction to fair housing law, we'll take a look at a variety of situations in which fair housing violations could occur. Real estate professionals are subject to federal, state, and local fair housing laws that are intended to uncover and eradicate discriminatory conduct in the sale or rental of dwellings. The history of federal fair housing legislation began after the Civil War with a flurry of legislative activity to grant full citizenship to slaves and guarantee all persons the right to due process and equal protection under the law. Over the next few years, however, U.S. Supreme Court decisions as well as various Jim Crow laws effectively nullified the civil rights of African Americans and institutionalized segregation under the legal doctrine of separate but equal. For the next 58 years, separate schools, racial zoning restrictions, segregated restaurants, and water fountains were lawful in this country. In 1954, this doctrine was reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court, and the modern civil rights movement was launched. The Federal Fair Housing Act, known as Title VIII, was signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson in 1968, and a comprehensive body of statutes governing private and public housing followed. Since the late 60s, the National Association of Realtors has taken a leadership role as a committed and outspoken advocate for fair housing education, and for the enforcement of the Fair Housing Act. NAR's leadership and the commitment of our members to fair housing is critical to the success of the real estate industry today, and it assures members of the protected classes that they can share in the American dream of homeownership. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, or national origin. In addition to federal fair housing law, many state and local governments have adopted their own fair housing laws. Some state and local laws provide broader coverage than the Fair Housing Act, prohibiting discrimination based on factors such as age, source of income, marital status, and sexual orientation. The methods of enforcing fair housing laws are varied, and the penalties for violations are some of the most severe the law will allow. The practical effect of a finding of liability for most real estate firms is serious financial loss, coupled with loss of reputation and public embarrassment. In our first scene, Ken, the listing agent, is delivering an offer to the seller, Mike. How would you deal with a seller or owner who wants to discriminate? Let's take a look at how Ken handles the situation.
So you have an offer for me?
Yes, sir, and it's a good one.
The price looks good. What's this name?
The buyer is Dr. Somchai.
Somchai. Where's he from?
He's moving here from Cleveland.
Oh, that's not what I meant. What's his nationality?
That doesn't matter, Mr. O'Brien. You can't consider country of origin when deciding whether to accept an offer. In fact, it's illegal to discriminate against home buyers on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, or national origin.
Come on, Kenny. You grew up in this neighborhood. You know what it's like. It's one of the reasons I gave you the listing. I can't sell my house to just anybody. I only want you to bring me offers from the right kind of people.
Mr. O'Brien, I must...
It's not like I'm some kind of racist. I'm really just looking out for the buyer. You know as well as I do that he'd be uncomfortable here. Besides, it's not like I can be sued for ignoring offers.
Actually, you can be sued for violating the Fair Housing Act if you discriminate on the basis of one of the protected classes I mentioned a minute ago. Also, my firm and I are vulnerable to a Fair Housing Act lawsuit if I work with a seller who is discriminating. I'm sorry, but if I can't convince you to change your position, I'm going to have to talk to my broker about it. It may mean terminating our contract.
Accepting or rejecting prospective buyers or tenants based on their membership in a protected class is a fair housing violation, except in very limited circumstances where an owner of a dwelling that has 4 or fewer units, one of which is occupied by that owner, wants to sell the property without the assistance of a real estate agent and without advertising. Race discrimination, however, is never lawful. Additionally, applying more stringent qualification criteria for members of a protected class can be considered a refusal to sell or rent, and therefore also constitute a violation. As Ken informed Mike, fair housing laws apply to the owners and sellers of housing. You can provide a valuable service to owners and sellers by informing them of their fair housing rights and responsibilities at the time you take the listing. This also helps you avoid situations in which the owner or seller expects you to discriminate on his or her behalf. Our next scene deals with another aspect of fair housing, the concept of reasonable accommodation for handicapped individuals. Peggy, a rental agent, has an appointment to show an apartment to Bob, who has some special needs. Let's see how she handles the situation. After the showing, Peggy meets with Cora, her broker.
I'm really glad you have some vacancies in this neighborhood. I used to live around here and have always wanted to come back if I had the opportunity.
Oh, that's great. Now, as I said on the phone, there is a lovely unit available on the first floor, and the previous tenant made modifications to make the unit wheelchair accessible, so you'd be able to move right in.
That unit is a studio, isn't it?
It is, but big as studios go. It's close to 800 square feet.
It's not bad, but no thanks. I had enough of studio life during my years as a poor graduate student. Anyway, according to your ad, you also have a 1-bedroom available.
Yes, there is, but it hasn't been modified to accommodate a wheelchair.
Well, that's okay. I'd pay for the modifications.
But why spend the money
To live where I want to? Don't you think if you were in my position, you might do the same thing?
Well, I don't know.
Those parking spots behind the building, they're for the tenants, right?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to reserve the one closest to the ramp.
I'm sorry, Bob, but the spaces are all unreserved.
Couldn't you make an exception?
I don't think so. I mean, what would the other tenants say?
You know, Peggy, to be honest with you, I'm getting a little frustrated by your answers. First, you try to steer me to a unit I don't want, and then you won't make what I consider to be a reasonable exception to your parking rules.
Bob, I just don't know if we can make the adjustments you're asking for.
Well, those adjustments are guaranteed to me by the Fair Housing Act.
Just let me talk to some people and I'll get right back to you, okay?
Okay.
Okay, that sounds great. Keep me posted on Maple Avenue. Now, you showed the Greenwood Avenue unit to Bob Johnson this morning, right?
Yeah.
And you have a signed rental agreement in that briefcase.
Not yet.
Really? Bob seems so excited about the place when he was here yesterday. What happened?
Turns out he was interested in the 1-bedroom.
So?
So that unit isn't modified for someone in a wheelchair. I tried to interest him in the wheelchair accessible studio, but it seems he wants more space.
Is he willing to pay for modifications to the 1-bedroom?
He said he would, but do we have to let him? I don't understand why he would want to spend that much money instead of just taking the other unit.
Peggy, we're not in the business of telling people where they should want to live. And yes, we do need to allow him to make reasonable modifications to the unit in order to accommodate his disability, or we will be in violation of the Fair Housing Act. Did he ask for anything else?
He also wanted to reserve a parking spot, the one closest to the ramp, but I told him those spaces were all unassigned and that it wouldn't be fair to the other tenants if I reserved a spot for him.
Guess what?
The Fair Housing Act requires us to make exceptions to our rules.
Reasonable exceptions to accommodate the tenant's disability, yes.
I'd better call Bob quickly before he finds an agent who has a better understanding of the Fair Housing Act.
You do that.
Under the Fair Housing Act, property owners must permit a handicapped tenant to make reasonable modifications to a unit at the tenant's expense so that the handicapped tenant may fully enjoy the premises. The property owner may, however, condition modifications to the interior of a unit on the tenant's agreement to restore the unit to its original condition when the handicapped person's occupancy ends. The property owner may also require that all modifications be done in a safe and workmanlike manner. Examples of reasonable modifications that must be permitted are installing grab bars around bathtubs and toilet seats, widening a door to permit passage of a wheelchair, building a ramp where there are currently steps, installing a flashing light in lieu of a doorbell, and relocating environmental controls. The Fair Housing Act also requires property owners to make reasonable accommodations by making exceptions to any rules or regulations governing the housing development so that the tenant may fully enjoy the premises. Examples of such exceptions to rules and regulations are allowing a seeing eye dog where there is a no pet rule, assigning a parking space to a handicapped tenant near his or her building entrance when parking spots are not normally assigned, and waiving a rule banning vans in a building parking lot when a van is necessary for a handicapped person's transportation. In our next scene, Yvonne, a buyer, is visiting the office of Carol, her agent. Yvonne is new to the area and is looking for help in finding a neighborhood in which she would be comfortable.
So you know my cousin Juan?
Sure do. We worked together for a long time, and when he heard I was moving to the area, he said I had to pick you to be my agent. He says you're the best there is.
Such high praise from a guy I used to pick on unmercifully when he was a kid. Anyway, I see from the stack of paper you brought in that you've been doing some looking around already.
Right. These are listings that I found on Realtor.com. There looks to be a lot to choose from, but I don't know the city neighborhoods at all, so it's really hard for me to judge whether something's a good value or if a certain neighborhood is even a place where I want to live.
Well, I'm here to help.
Well, here's one that looks great. It's in the Forest View neighborhood. Is that a mixed neighborhood?
Can I ask you what you mean by mixed?
Well, I certainly want a neighborhood where there are other Hispanic families, but I also want there to be an ethnic mix. I want my kids to grow up around people who aren't just like them. What is the ethnic breakdown in Forest View?
Well, there are a number of sources that I can direct you to for that information, including some very helpful websites.
But you're my real estate agent. Why can't you just tell me?
Yvonne, I understand your frustration. If that information is truly important to you, I encourage you to check out some of these sites. However, I can't direct you to any neighborhood based on its racial or ethnic makeup. Courts have held brokers and agents in violation of the Fair Housing Act for limiting customers' choices based on the racial or ethnic composition of a neighborhood.
I guess I understand that.
What I can tell you about Forest View is that it has great access to public transportation, and the schools produce students with standardized test scores that are among the best in the city. And true to its name, there are tons of trees in Forest View.
Although Yvonne believed her request for information on the ethnic makeup of neighborhoods was a legitimate request, Carol acted properly by not providing information that could have steered Yvonne to or away from a particular neighborhood. Steering is conduct designed to influence a person's housing choice on the basis of one of the protected classes. The classic example of racial steering is a real estate agent directing minority prospects to integrated or all-minority neighborhoods and directing white prospects to all-white neighborhoods. Evidence of steering is often gathered through the use of testers, and suits challenging steering may be brought by the testers themselves or the fair housing organizations that engage them. It's not enough to know what the law is. Real estate professionals must speak and act in a manner consistent with the Fair Housing Act. For example, you should not say things such as, "I know that I shouldn't say this, but I just have to warn you that this neighborhood is changing for the worse," or, "You may not be happy here since most of the residents aren't Hispanic." Actions taken to market a listing or your firm must be in accordance with fair housing laws. As a rule of thumb, ads should focus on property descriptions rather than descriptions of potential buyers. Stating that a property is near a jogging trail, focusing on location, is much more acceptable than saying that it's great for joggers, focusing on potential buyers. Keep in mind that violations of the Fair Housing Act can occur without intent. It is the perception of a reasonable member of the relevant protected class that determines whether the advertisement is discriminatory. When planning your marketing strategy, be sure not to base your marketing decisions on prospective clients' membership or non-membership in any of the classes protected by the Federal Fair Housing Act or by your state or local fair housing laws. For example, don't focus on only Hispanic buyers to the exclusion of African Americans or Asians or Caucasians. Don't market your services only to Christians to the exclusion of people of other faiths. Don't place your listings only in newsletters designed to reach seniors to the exclusion of families with children. In other words, if you use niche market publications, you must also use advertising vehicles that reach the general population. Although using the Equal Housing Opportunity slogan and logo in your ads is not required by law, doing so expresses your commitment to fair housing. In our final scene, we'll look in on Marty showing one of his firm's rental properties to Mary, a prospective tenant. Several days after the showing, Marty meets with Cora, his broker.
What a lovely building.
The lobby was redone earlier this year, and all the units have been refurbished over the last few years. New carpeting, appliances, fixtures, you name it.
So what's available?
A few units are ready for immediate occupancy. My favorite is a 3-bedroom on the 5th floor. It has a huge 100-square-foot balcony directly accessible from both the master bedroom and the living room. And you have a great view of the lake from the balcony.
I can already see that big balcony filled with my kids' toys.
Kids?
Oh, I didn't mention the little angels. Actually, they're great kids. It's just that with all 3 of them being boys between the ages of 4 and 8, they're quite a handful.
Right. Did I mention that I've also got a great 1st floor unit available? It's just as big as the 5th floor unit and has a nice patio that would be great for the kids.
But the view couldn't be as nice as it is on the higher floor.
The view is different, but it's still a nice one. And I just remembered there is another Asian family on the 1st floor, the Chens. They have young kids too. Your families would probably become best friends.
Marty, believe it or not, we do have friends who aren't Asian. And I am still interested in that 5th floor unit.
Well, I've shown that unit to several other people today, and it may be that the unit isn't even available anymore. But I know that the 1st floor unit is.
I'll have to talk to my husband about this.
Marty, I just received a call from a Mitchell Chang.
The name doesn't ring a bell.
He said that you showed some apartments to his wife a couple of days ago.
Oh, sure. Mary. Nice lady.
And what happened?
Nothing. We were at Whispering Oaks, and I tried to interest her in the 1st floor vacancy. She said she had to talk to her husband about it.
She talked to her husband, all right, and now they're talking about filing a discrimination complaint.
You've got to be kidding.
Marty, like I would ever kid about a possible violation of the Fair Housing Act? Is it true you initially told her the 5th floor unit was available and then later told her it might not be?
Yes, but after I found out she had 3 little kids, I knew she should be looking at a unit with a patio instead of a balcony. You know how rambunctious my kids are, and they're pretty much the same ages as hers. There's no way I'd want them running around on a balcony like that. Besides, you know that balcony is over the swimming pool deck, and when the kids inevitably toss toys over the balcony rail, I don't think it will go over too well with the sunbathers.
So you just decided on your own that apartment wasn't right for them?
Yeah, but I had their best interests in mind. Besides, there's another Asian family on the 1st floor, so the Changs would be more comfortable there anyway.
You didn't tell Mrs. Chang that, did you?
Sure, why not?
Boy, do you ever need remedial fair housing training. No wonder they're considering filing a complaint. First, you try and discourage them from the 5th floor unit because they have young children, a violation. Then you try and steer them to a unit on another floor because of the ethnic makeup of the residents of that floor, another violation.
Wow, I just thought I was looking out for their best interests.
As Cora pointed out to Marty, he unlawfully steered Mary to a particular unit because of familial status, as well as her ethnicity. It is irrelevant that Marty's primary motivation was the safety of the children. The Fair Housing Act forbids property owners or agents from refusing to sell or rent a dwelling to an otherwise qualified prospect simply because the prospect has children under the age of 18 in his or her household. Although the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination based upon familial status, it doesn't preempt reasonable state or local regulation limiting the number of persons who may occupy a particular dwelling. 2 persons per bedroom is usually deemed reasonable. Also, qualified senior citizen housing is exempt from the Fair Housing Act's requirements regarding discrimination based on familial status. With qualified senior housing, the units must either be occupied solely by persons 62 years of age or older, or 80% of the units must be occupied by at least one person 55 years of age or older, and the community must be intended and marketed as housing for persons 55 or older. Non-compliance with fair housing laws is a risk that responsible real estate brokers simply cannot assume as a cost of doing business. Furthermore, fair housing cases are almost always excluded from errors and omissions insurance policies. Your firm should therefore have an effective fair housing office compliance program, including the following components: the firm's policy and public commitment to fair housing, agent education and training in practices that ensure compliance with the fair housing laws, regular and systematic documentation of the firm's practice of affording equal opportunity and service, and identification and correction of failures in performance. A key element of an office compliance program is the use of the Prospect Equal Service Report. The report is used to record basic prospect information, including membership in a protected class, the prospect's needs and wants as requested by the prospect himself, property shown to the prospect, and a record of service provided. This report will help you keep uniform records for all prospects and provides 2 fair housing tools. It provides evidence of your firm's compliance with the law, which may become an invaluable defense in the event of a housing discrimination complaint, and it allows you and your broker to monitor and review your compliance with the firm's fair housing policy and make corrections before a complaint alleging housing discrimination is filed. Laws do not change attitudes. People do. To provide equal housing opportunities, you must make a conscious personal commitment to eliminating bias and prejudice from the housing market. This commitment means adhering to office procedures to provide all customers and clients equal professional services. Your commitment is required because equal housing opportunity is the law. It's good business, and it's right.